So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on this Twitter leaderboard. So we're going to have like a Twitter handle here and the number of times they've tweeted on the left-hand side. So in order to do this, what I don't want to do is I don't want to create the whole of the architecture just to work on this bit of the UI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a stub service at the back end, which kind of publishes fake Twitter handles. So I don't have to worry at this stage about connecting to Twitter, about reading and parsing Twitter data. I'm going to use this stub service to drive out the design of the UI. Nicely, we can do this quite easily with Java 8. So here we go. So what we're going to have is we're going to have some sort of standalone service here, which is going to emit Twitter handles. And then we're going to have something here which will count the number of times we've seen those Twitter handles and something to create our leaderboard. All I want to do is I have a bunch of fake Twitter handles at the top, and I've made them really obviously fake. If I made them look real, then it wouldn't be so obvious when I'm using fake data versus real data. And what I want to do is I want to pick one of those Twitter handles and publish it using WebSockets. Now, we're going to look at WebSockets a bit more in detail this afternoon, but for now, all we need to do is we'll use a class I've created called stub service to do this for us. So we'll create a new stub service. And as I say, we'll look at this particular stub service in much more detail later. What I want to show you is how simple it is to create brand new services from scratch using Java 8. So we need a path. I want to run this at a path of /users. I want to run it on port 8083. Now I'm going to give it something to generate the messages. Now, what I said I wanted to do for generating messages is use this array of fake Twitter handles, pick one randomly, and publish that on the service. Okay? So obviously, this is the Java 8 tutorial, so I should be using lambdas, but we're going to do this the old-fashioned way because getting your head around using lambdas to begin with, for me, I found quite tricky because I've been using Java for a long time, and I haven't been using things like Groovy or some of the other languages which already have closures. So I'm much more used to using anonymous inner classes. This particular method takes a supplier. And what the supplier does is it supplies something. In this particular case, it supplies a string because we're going to be supplying a string which is the Twitter handle. And so in order to get the Twitter handle, I'm going to use my example handles array. I'm going to get the Twitter handle at some randomly generated value between 0 and 27. So I'm going to take my random and get next int. And I have 27 values, so I'm going to get the next int. So this will randomly pick one of these values and return that. What you see is my IDE is actually suggesting that well, you don't need to do all of this boilerplate. You're using Java 8. So I use Alt-Enter, and my IDE will suggest to replace this with a lambda. So as someone fairly new to Java 8, that was kind of my easy way of getting into using lambdas, because I found passing in behavior a bit weird, and I couldn't quite get my head around it. But the idea of passing in anonymous inner classes, which the IDE converts into lambdas, I found much more sensible. I need to run this particular service. But here you can see what lambdas are kind of useful for. When I'm creating my stub service, I'm going to tell the service where to run. I want it to run on the URI of /users, which port to run at, and then I'm going to tell the stub service what behavior I want it to do. The behavior is I want it to publish something, and I'm going to publish that something. This is the behavior I want it to use in order to figure out what to publish. Okay, so we've written our first lambda. And if I run this, let's get rid of that. Okay, well, we'll be able to see if that's running or not when we get on to the next bit of actually showing that data. But for the time being, it hasn't errored while it's running. So what we have now is we have our service here, which is just emitting these strings, these fake, like these 3 character strings. And that was really, really simple for us to do. Granted, I had created a bit of infrastructure around that, which I'll show you in more detail later. But you can see that because Java 8 gives us the ability to separate behavior, we can actually have all our business logic kind of contained in just a single class, and infrastructure much more easily separated out here. We just say to the infrastructure, run this tiny piece of code. This is the behavior I want you to run. Because Java 8, you can pass behavior around as lambdas, not just parameters, so not just objects. I can pass in, do this particular chunk. Then that makes it easier for me to separate out all my infrastructure over here from the actual behavior I care about. So, like the thing is about infrastructure is often you have I'm going to open this and do this, and then what I want you to do is this is the key bit I really care about, and then I'm going to close this and finish this off. And usually, this kind of thing, when you have these services where you have a set here and a set here and just a little bit in the middle which changes, that leads to a lot of copy-paste coding, right? Because it's difficult to separate out those different concerns. But now that you can pass in that tiny bit of behavior as a parameter, it's a bit easier to separate those things out. We'll look at this in much more detail when we look at how to refactor stuff to using things in this way. But the idea being here is that with only 3 lines of code, I could show you how to create a brand new service. And the actual service code isn't that complicated either, just by separating these things out using lambdas. We will see it in action in a bit more later. So that was basically, there's not a lot about creating that stub user data. So it's quite a short section because it's not that complicated once you can start doing this sort of thing.